In today's lesson, we'll be learning how to calculate the midpoint of a line segment. In this diagram, you can see a line segment. It is a line segment because it is bounded by these two endpoints. Alternatively, a line would go on and on forever, whereas a line segment stops. How would you calculate the midpoint of this line segment, which lies directly in the middle of this line segment? You would take the x-coordinates of the endpoints, add them up, then divide by 2. Then you would take the y-coordinates of the endpoints, add them up, and divide by 2. And that would give you the coordinates of the midpoint. In our first example, we want to determine the coordinates of the midpoint of each line segment. I'm arbitrarily going to label point A as point 1. So that would be x1, y1, which would make point B point 2, which would be x2 and y2. It doesn't really matter because when you add these up and divide by 2, you'll get the same answer. Let's begin with our equation. So midpoint is the sum of the x-coordinates divided by 2 and the sum of the y-coordinates divided by 2. That should be pretty simple. x1 is 1, x2 is 7, y1 is 2, and y2 is 10. Let's simplify some of this. 1 plus 7 is 8, and 2 plus 10 is 12. Simplify that again. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. Therefore, the midpoint is 4, 6. And you always want to take a look at your diagram to see if this coordinate is reasonable, and it looks pretty reasonable to me. In our second example, we want to determine the coordinates of the midpoint of each line segment. Again, I'm going to arbitrarily call point D point 1. So that's going to be x1 and y1. Again, I'm going to arbitrarily call point C point 2, and that's going to be x2, y2. Let's begin with our equation for midpoint, which is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Our next step would be to substitute in our known values. I know that x1 is 4, and x2 is -2. I also know that y1 is 5, and y2 is 1. Let's simplify this. 4 plus -2 is just 2, and 5 plus 1 is 6. Again, we're going to simplify this, so 2 divided by 2 is 1, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Therefore, the coordinates of the midpoint is 1, 3, and like I said earlier, you do want to double check your diagram to make sure that this coordinate is reasonable. In our last example, we want to determine the coordinates of the midpoint of each line segment. I'm going to arbitrarily call point G point 1. So that's going to be x1, y1, and I'm arbitrarily going to call point H point 2, which is x2, y2. We're going to begin this question by writing the equation for our midpoint, which is the sum of the x-coordinates divided by 2 and the sum of the y-coordinates divided by 2. Next, let's substitute in our known values. x1 is -3, x2 is 2, y1 is 2, and y2 is -6. Let's simplify some of these numbers. So -3 plus 2 is -1, and 2 plus -6 is -4. Now you could simplify this fraction into a decimal, however I'm going to leave it as a fraction, and -4 divided by 2 is 2. And last but not least, you again want to double check your diagram to make sure that this midpoint is reasonable.